So we're going to segue into NSX in cloud, but we're going to really hone in on NSX in native public cloud. So we're not going to spend time on VMC on AWS and all of that stuff. This is basically native Amazon use case. And in the interest of time, we're going to focus mainly on the architecture of that and then a demo of what the customer experience for that looks like, right? So this is probably the first time this is being talked about in a public forum. So you're probably seeing, I mean, we're going to do this for the first time ever. So just kind of giving you context that we're going to skip all the preamble and really focus on, really give you a quick snapshot into the architecture pieces and go into a live demo, which will cover some of the questions around inventory and other things that you talked about earlier.
So we will talk about NSX in public cloud. My name is Amol Tipnis. I am a technical product manager working on this project within NSBU. So let me just quickly start with the architecture slides because I think we have seen a lot of other slides in terms of use cases. So for running NSX in public cloud, what we have done is we have modified certain components that we have in existing NSX solution, and we have also added a few new components that we'll talk about. The first thing that we need to also look at is when you run workloads in public clouds like Amazon and Azure, you do not have access to their hypervisors. All you care about is deploying VMs, and that's all you can get access to. That means we cannot install any modules or hypervisor modules out there. So what we have done here is basically took the data plane of NSX and brought it into the VMs or the instances running as an NSX tools, like an agent running inside the VM. And then we have also taken our NSX Edge that runs on-prem, modified it, packaged it like an AMI that can run inside Amazon. When we deploy this solution, we will have one gateway per VPC. So I hope you guys are familiar with the VPC construct. So what we have done is we deploy a gateway in a VPC, so that VPC becomes a NSX managed VPC, and any VMs that go into the VPC can be managed by NSX. Why we did this is because we wanted to have the granularity in terms of managing one VPC and not doing the other. Could be a dev or test versus production VPC, and we wanted to give that flexibility to the customers. And then we have the control plane, which is the NSX control plane, and the management plane. Now we also created an additional component called Cloud Service Manager. Because think about, in a traditional on-prem environment, the whole experience is all integrated in terms of the inventory is vCenter, it's a plugin, you kind of see everything in one place. But in case of a public cloud, your developers are deploying VMs in Amazon or could be in Azure, and then you're defining your NSX policies here. Now for the cloud administrator to kind of have a unified view, what we created is this Cloud Service Manager. So it gives me a view, an inventory view of what's running in Amazon. As a developer can go and deploy the VMs in public cloud, the NSX administrator or cloud administrator sees that in his view, and we will look at that CSM in the live demo. And then also we want to make sure that the VMs are coming up in Amazon, but are they really protected? Are the policies pushed down to those VMs? Those are things that we need to see as far as the NSX goes. So that CSM will give you that kind of unified view. Any questions on slides?
We had talked about how do you kind of go into these different environments. Think of it as this is the inventory collector and kind of coordinator between the inventory systems of Amazon, Azure, Google, and how we do network and security and using those objects and naming profiles consistently across those scenarios.
Okay. So let's do a quick demo because in the interest of time, I think you guys will be excited to see the live demo rather than me talking through the slides. So in the demo, what I'm going to do is I have a WordPress application running inside my VPC, which is a two-tier app, a web and a DB. And then I have another application, which is a Windows application running on the same VPC. However, they are not secure because the developer didn't care about security policies. IT guy couldn't really react in terms of how do I apply security to it. But now, and then we'll see how that thing streamlines when NSX comes into play, and how do we secure the application from the other applications running inside the same VPC. Obviously, for interest of time, I've deployed the public cloud gateway. This public cloud gateway can be deployed through the CSM. The CSM is not just the inventory manager, it also does lifecycle management in terms of how do I control a new VPC, how do I undeploy a VPC, how do I upgrade the gateway, because once we start deploying gateway, I need to do the lifecycle management of the gateway. So all those things are done by the CSM, and we'll look at some of the screens there. So now what I'm going to do is just going to access the URL on my browser, and you'll see that the application is running. It's just a plain WordPress application. And then next what I would do is RDP to this Windows box and do an Nmap scan just to see, that's a neighboring application can really talk to this application and it's unsecure. So let me just quickly switch over to my CSM. Before I do that, let me just go to the WordPress. I mean, this is a live setup. I mean, you guys can also try going to this application if you need to go there. And that's my NSX public cloud, networking field day. I can basically scroll down. Let me just get the hang of it. Yeah, I can go to my blog. I have a hello networking field day delegates, blog post there. So it's all live running there. Just to prove that this thing is not secure, what I have here is I'm logging to that neighboring Windows box, and I'm going to do an Nmap scan on this particular VM. And what we'll see there is basically it's able to discover my web VM, my database VM. I know it's very hard to see, but if you look at the IP address 5.53, that's my database VM, which is listening on SSH, which it should not be listening on for anything except for the administrator. It's listening on HTTP. The database server should not be running HTTP, but unfortunately, it's not been correctly, secured. And then I have my MySQL port, which is open. And then I have the other VM, which is my 5.115, which is my web VM, which has SSH and HTTP allowed. So obviously, it's deployed in Amazon. It's running, but it's not really secure there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you the policies that were created in NSX Manager to kind of bring this whole thing into NSX control and make it more secure.
Where is your NSX Manager hosted in this context?
So, yeah, in my context, to make it simple, I have deployed everything in public cloud in the management VPC, but technically it's NSX Manager, could be anywhere as long as you have IP connectivity back to the gateway.
Yes, I think what typically we'll see is folks will probably end up deploying it in a management VPC. What will happen is in most cases it will be a management VPC or it will be offered as a service. So essentially you wouldn't have to deal with the lifecycle management of the NSX piece, and you just use the service and the API interfaces that it offers, which I think will become kind of the long-term direction customers will take. But initially people want to kind of drive their own control policy, so they will deploy the controller manager. We'll give both options.
So I go into this NSX Manager. I can see that the policies, firewall policies are defined, and my policies are based on VM attributes. So I'm not specifically saying this IP address to that IP address. I've created a policy says that any VM has the name web in it. That's my web tier. Any VM that has a database is a database tier. And then I have created an application level group which says any VM that has the name WordPress is my WordPress application. So I'm kind of creating like these overlapping groups in such a way that I'm applying the policy just to that particular WordPress VM or VMs. And the policy says any to WordPress. Let me just expand this column here. WordPress web allow HTTP, and the second one is basically WordPress web to DB allow MySQL port. So those are things, and anything else should be dropped. So that's the policy I created. The next thing I did was went into the CSM, and I'll show you how you go into the CSM and look at the inventory. And this is where you basically see the view of your inventory running in public cloud. I can go to cross cloud here. I see that there's an account which is, okay, so basically what I've done here is I have added one Amazon account in my pod here, but I can basically support multiple Amazon accounts because an organization may have more than one account, and that's typically the case. Once you provide the account credentials, what this service does, or this CSM does, is it goes and refreshes the inventory in Amazon. So it's synchronizing the regions, the availability zones, the VMs that are deployed. And once it goes through the synchronization process, you will see that the inventory or that earlier screen came up. And then we should be able to kind of navigate through that inventory to see how many regions are deployed. So when I say regions, Amazon may have multiple regions, but I may be using just 2 regions out of those. So I'll only list 2 of them. In my case, I have 3 regions where I have workloads. I have Frankfurt, I have North Cal, and I have Oregon. So if I click on the regions, it nicely shows me, these 3 regions here. Within these 3 regions, I can see how many VPCs are there as a split and the number of instances. I can go into the VPCs, and it shows me all the VPCs that are kind of deployed and running. I have 4 VPCs. Going back to your question, the management VPC is also running in Oregon, where I have deployed my NSX manager. In fact, it's identified by this little icon here saying management VPC, so it knows where my managers and everything is running. And then I have one VPC where I have deployed the gateway. But if I need to deploy a gateway in the second VPC, let's say I want to manage one more VPC, I can just go here and say deploy gateway. Nice. It will prompt me for certain options here. Typically a PEM file, because it's you need to SSH to the gateway for troubleshooting and stuff. So you need to provide a PEM file. I can do that here, and then I can go through the process of where do I want to deploy it, because it's ultimately at the end of the day it's a VM. So I need to specify which availability zone I need to deploy, what subnets I need to deploy. Once I go through that process, this CSM will trigger the launch of the AMI, the gateway AMI. It brings up the AMI, that gateway then registers to the NSX manager, and everything is done at the back end, and that VPC at the end of that process is ready to be managed. Once you have the gateway running, the VPC is said to be NSX managed, then you can start managing the VMs there.
So hopefully this gives you kind of the view and the snapshot, right? We went and collected the inventory. It gives you a full view of all the VPCs, all the attributes. You can pick a VPC at a time that you want to manage, right-click gateway, deploy, and after that, the rest of the experience is very much to what you're doing on-prem. So once
I'm sorry. So I guess, and I've had this conversation ad nauseum with folks on Twitter on the concept of NSX in AWS, NSX anywhere. So we're taking this traditional networking construct and we're shoehorning it into AWS. We're not, as I understand it, we're not using AWS native ACLs management. We're saying, okay, we manage VMs in the data center. Now we're going to take VMs and manage VMs in AWS. The disadvantage to that is that since we're not going natively into AWS APIs, as AWS creates additional services like their recent telephone service they plugged in, NSX has no native understanding or context of that type of service. So I can't say, hey, NSX, don't allow this host or this service or this application to talk to this AWS service or AWS S3 endpoints, et cetera, et cetera. Help me understand why I would continue to take this model of private data center and shoehorn it into AWS. So
this is a very good question. In fact, that was part of my original slides, which we kind of skipped in the interest of time. So we talked to many customers coming in for cab or visiting them. One thing they said, yes, absolutely. Can I write my automation around Amazon APIs and use Amazon functionality? Absolutely, you can do it. What happens when you also use Azure? Now I had to write a plugin entirely for the new cloud, and as you go from one to the other, you need to build plugins for that. That's first problem. Second thing is the functionality, the constructs that you get in Amazon are very different than Azure, which means that now you need to be aware of those constructs. The advantage with NSX is NSX, you write the automation around NSX constructs, and they are available across the clouds, on-prem as well as across public cloud. So you basically write once, deploy anywhere. That's the whole idea of doing that. The third thing that you brought was, when we developed this solution, we wanted to make sure that there's a reason why people go to Amazon. So it's not going to be like shoehorning and saying, oh, you use NSX and then you don't get to use anything else that is in Amazon. That's not the point. We want to coexist with whatever service Amazon gets you. Just like on-prem, if you want to use F5 load balancer, you can use it and not use NSX load balancer. We don't stop you from doing that. Similarly, if you want to use ELB in Amazon, but want to use microsegmentation from NSX, you want to use logical switching for any reasons that make sense for your applications, you're templatizing it, deploying it, You can absolutely do that. So the reason is absolutely you want to have best of both worlds, but then again, one of the worries that customer have is I don't want to be locked into a particular cloud provider. So in that case, can I use NSX as that abstraction layer? So I create certain things here, and tomorrow if I think my application can run better or cheaper or any other factor that drives me to move to another public cloud, can NSX help me do that? And absolutely, you write once, automate once, deploy on the other cloud.
So that makes perfect sense if I'm the VP of IT infrastructure. If I'm the VP of development, I couldn't care less about NSX or whatever.
Correct.
I'm going to, my developers independently, this is where the practical challenge of silos. This is, from a technical piece, and now say my stand, we can move on. From a technical piece, pretty cool stuff. I can take my network overlay that I have in my data center, have the same network overlay, AWS, Azure, any other cloud service provider in general. The practical challenge that I've run into every time that the customer's already built the application, they've done what they needed to do, and they've moved on. And to try and come back and say, brownfield, I'm going to go back and put my overlay on top of your existing app, not so much.
So there are two pieces to this, and the number one piece is that we talked about consistency and all of those things, right? So stateful segmentation is something that we uniquely bring right now to Amazon, right? And it's right now because the cloud moves fast, right? But right now the thing that we are bringing is stateful segmentation, which is unique in that. The second piece is visibility and operations, which is when you have to pass that compliance audit or other elements, how can you do it consistently across all of these different clouds, right? So even in the scenario that you talked about where you have a developer experience, we're doing two things. One is in talking to these customers who are using frameworks like Pivotal, Cloud Foundry, or Red Hat OpenShift or Kubernetes, what they're doing is they're actually going and trying to do whitelisting of all these different services and all of those pieces. Through this, you can do whitelisting. The use case that you talked about, that is block access to the S3 service, or because I'm a customer X, I only want to offer XYZ services. That's absolutely something we can do out of this service in itself. And so I would say there is unique value we bring in segmentation, in the compliance and the monitoring aspects. That is an after the fact use case for IT organizations. For developers, you're right. If I'm building a native application today, I'm using it, it works, I don't need an NSX, then I won't go and add my value there. But if I am using something like a OpenShift or a Pivotal or name your tool of choice and building a multi-cloud app, what we are doing is by plugging into these frameworks, and that was supposed to be the last session, we're not going to do it, but by plugging into those frameworks, when you build those applications, you will build in a security group consistency that is IT aligned. And so the developer meeting the IT, and that's what I mean by programmatic IT models, is what this will deliver. And we're working with these DevOps tools, with these application tools to go there. So we are working with the IT team, you're right, but I understand the problem statement around developers, and that's where we kind of bridge the gap with these dev frameworks. And so you'll see both sides come together fairly nicely. Again, very early days for us. We are discovering too, but this is not to take the traditional model and shoehorn it in. We're going use case by use case to bring value.
Yeah. All right, so thanks, Milind. So I think what I'm going to do next is basically run a script which enables the VM tools that are running in the VMs, and this will essentially apply the security policy. So think about, as a IT, I had to create the policy in NSX. I had to deploy the gateway, which we saw how we do that, and then we have the NSX tool agents that go and basically get the policy and enforce them. And let's just go back here to our RDP, and let's try to do a scan at this time and see if we are able to now go and discover those ports running on those VMs. Obviously, the machine that I'm running has the ARP table, so it knows about those IPs it's going to try out. But as you can see now, is the 5.53 is my database server. That's now been secure because my Windows app is not part of the WordPress application, so I am outside of it. So that application is secure, and within that. For the web tier, my HTTP is allowed for anyone, including my Windows VM, so I'm able to kind of control access to that and nothing else. So it's kind of like I'm creating this whole secure bubble around the WordPress application, and depending on where you're coming from and whether you belong to the app or not, I can basically help you secure that an application. So I mean, that's all I have from my demo perspective. I mean, we can go through more questions if you want to, or I don't know whether if you want to. We have 5 minutes if Sai wants to do it.
We were supposed to do the container session last, and I think we run out of time because we want to stop at 12:30. We can always do that as a separate session if there's interest and drive that. But any questions on this? This is the first time we are kind of talking about this more kind of in a public forum. So hopefully this gives you enough context of what we're doing.
I know how normal NSX is licensed. How is NSX Cloud Service Manager licensed?
Yeah, so a great question. So in general, let me kind of handle this. So if you think of NSX, you bought it for on-prem, let's say, and you bought it, you had 100 sockets on-prem, you're using it. Now, you decide to do a cloud strategy, and you
Do I
decide
have to license everything Amazon has?
No. So
Like Oracle? I could use it.
So let's say 20 sockets worth of workloads move to native AWS. And so the idea behind how you will use NSX is the licensing is portable with the workload. So as a result, it's very future investment protection. Like as workloads move, even from vSphere to a non-vSphere to a bare metal scenario, the NSX pieces that you're using are transferable. And so, when you think of investment and forward investment protection, this is basically forward investment protection. And then as we add new features and functions, you just get it, right? So these are Azure, Amazon are all destinations. Containers is just another iteration. So all of these are just part of the kind of licensing mechanism, and it's transfer licensing ready, right?
So there's not a way for a customer that says, hey, we're in AWS, we want to deploy NSX, we like our cost model that we're doing with AWS where it's operational, we want to just go and grab from the marketplace NSX or anything like that. Is there an option for that?
So there is an option to, if you just decide to go native AWS, first-time customer likes NSX for that use case, DevOps, right? Goes in there, you can pay by the vCPU. That's the model we will enable, yes. I don't know about the whole just download from marketplace yet, but we'll get there.
So that purchase model is still going through like a VMware partner or something like that. It's not something that they would transact through.
Not yet, right? And that's where I think you will see us kind of mature when you think of cross-cloud services and how we transact. So. But it's very important to kind of understand the motivation of licensing, right? Which is the workload, as the workload moves, and we understand the changing environments and the changing dynamics, the NSX licensing is portable, right? And that's actually one of the virtues of, and advantages of doing it in software. So for the audience, we did not do the whole container and DevOps workflow, which would have to some extent talked about how this can be leveraged in a multi-cloud container environment. But we leave that for another day. So thank you.
Thank you very much.